The glass didn't fall. It cracked. Right there in his hand. A sharp pop echoed through the dim bar, clean, sudden, violent in its silence. Every conversation stopped. Forks froze. Even the jukebox stuttered, as if unsure whether to keep playing. At table 6 sat a man in his 30s. Faded cap. Plain clothes. Blood slid slowly from his palm, where his fingers had clenched the pint too tight. Shards sparkled in the amber light. He didn't say a word. Didn't curse. Didn't move. He just stared through it, like he'd seen something no one else in the room could imagine. The bar owner stormed over. "You breaking things for fun now?" Still, the man stayed silent. Rick, the owner, leaned in. "You've been sitting there for 20 minutes like a ghost. Not talking, not blinking. And now this? I don't care who you are. Out." The man stood up, calmly, no fight. But something about him made Rick take a step back without realizing. No words, just a look. Not angry, not defiant, just empty. He walked toward the door. The jukebox faded into a Springsteen ballad again. No one breathed. And as the door swung shut behind him, someone whispered, "Who the hell was that?" Nobody answered. Because sometimes you don't realize a story just started. Until the silence walks out the door, bleeding. Some men speak with silence. If that stays with you, stick around. Subscribe. This one runs deeper. He didn't walk fast. He didn't look back. But the air behind him felt colder, like whatever he carried had leaked into the walls of that bar and left the rest of them holding their breath. The man's name was Nathan Reese, 36, former Navy SEAL. And for the last few months, he'd been trying to live like none of that mattered anymore. But the body keeps records. And the silence, it stores everything. Nathan had arrived in Baymark, a fog-drenched coastal town with more bait shops than stoplights, because it was quiet. Not peaceful, quiet. The kind of town where no one asked why you kept to yourself, or why your eyes scanned every doorway before you entered. He rented a room above a rusted watch repair shop owned by a retired couple who rarely left their back porch. His mornings were long walks by the water. His nights, when he couldn't sleep, were spent wandering places like the Driftwood Dock. Never rowdy, never friendly. Just loud enough to remind you you weren't entirely alone. He'd chosen that booth on purpose. Table 6, back to the wall. Clear view of every exit. It wasn't habit. It was survival, reflex wired into the bone. And for 20 minutes, he just sat there, watching, until the glass broke. He hadn't meant to do it. There was no flash of anger, no memory bursting in through the walls, just a sudden tightness in his chest, then his hand clenched, and the pint gave way. The pain didn't register right away. Only when the bartender's voice barked into his quiet did the blood make sense. Nathan left because there was no point staying, no explanation he could give that would have made the man at the bar nod and say, "Ah, I get it. You crushed a beer glass in your hand because you remembered a burning Humvee in Kandahar." No one gets it. Not really. And he'd stopped trying to explain a long time ago. Back in his room, Nathan sat on the edge of the narrow twin bed, slowly peeling off the bandage he'd wrapped around his hand with the cheap first aid kit from the gas station across the street. The cut had sealed. It would scar. They always did. He reached into the bottom drawer of the nightstand and pulled out a small, beat-up envelope. Inside was a faded photograph. 5 men in uniforms, arms over shoulders, dirt-streaked and grinning. Table 6, written in Sharpie on the bottom corner. The original Table 6. Nathan was on the far left, Next to him, in the middle, was a man whose grin took up half his face. Eli Mercer. Eli had been the loudest of them, the joker, the kind of guy who played cards during gunfire and sang 80s love ballads during helicopter drops. And he was gone. Nathan traced the edge of Eli's face with his thumb, not for the first time. He opened the secure messaging app they'd used since the sandbox. The group thread was called Table 6, 4 of them still alive. It had been quiet for weeks. He typed, "Got thrown out of a bar tonight. Didn't say a word. Just broke a glass. Still not sure why. I'm okay. Just wanted someone to know." He hit send. Didn't expect an answer. That wasn't the point. The point was, when you're hanging on, sometimes you send a signal. Not to be rescued, just to be seen. Across the country, the message buzzed softly on a phone lying face down on a workbench in Denver. David Gant picked it up with a grease-stained hand. He'd been rebuilding a '67 Mustang for the past 3 days and hadn't looked at anything but carburetors and cigarette ash. The screen read, "Nathan Reese, 9:47 p.m. Got thrown out of a bar tonight?" David didn't smile, didn't frown either. Just stared at the words like they'd come from a version of himself he hadn't been in years. He wiped his hands slowly on a rag, walked to the locker in the back of the garage, pulled out a duffel bag that hadn't moved in 6 years. Inside it was a jacket, a photo, and a coin Eli Mercer gave him the night before he died. Nathan hadn't asked for help, but that wasn't the point. Back in Baymark, the Driftwood dock looked the same. Dim, sticky-floored, neon signs that buzzed louder than the customers. Rick Dalloway, the owner, was wiping down the bar with the same rag he'd been using since Monday. He hadn't stopped thinking about the guy from last night. Not because he felt guilty. Not exactly. More like unsettled. Like he'd seen something in that man's eyes that reminded him of something he didn't want to remember. He poured himself 2 fingers of well whiskey and knocked it back. That's when the bell above the door rang. David Gant stepped in like he'd walked in 100 times before. Boots dusty, eyes scanning once, then locking in. Rick looked up, already sizing him. "You lost?" David didn't blink. "Looking for the man you threw out last night?" Rick narrowed his eyes. "You a cop?" David shook his head. "SEAL, like him." Rick stiffened. "What's this? Payback?" "No, just clarity." David stepped up to the bar, pulled out a folded photo, the same one Nathan had. 5 men, arms around each other. "Ever seen this face?" He pointed to Eli, middle of the group, smile like sunlight. Rick stared, and something flickered, a memory, faint, flickering, fuzzy with time. A bar, a man, a refusal. David saw it. "You don't remember him, do you?" Rick said nothing. "That's Eli Mercer. He pulled Nathan out of a burning convoy in 2009, took the hit himself. Died 2 days later in a field hospital in Kandahar. Never made it home." David folded the photo back into his jacket. "You didn't throw Nathan out because he scared you. You threw him out because you saw something you didn't want to face." Rick's jaw clenched. "I run a clean bar." "No," David said. "You run from your own reflection." And with that, he turned and walked out. Rick didn't follow, but he didn't drink the rest of that whiskey either. He just stood there, looking at the spot where Nathan had sat. And finally, truly, he remembered. The next morning, the fog hung thick over Baymark's harbor like a confession that didn't want to be heard. Nathan sat on the seawall, hoodie pulled tight, staring out at the nothing that passed for a horizon. He heard the footsteps before he saw the man. Rick Dalloway stood a few feet away, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, face pale and heavy. Nathan didn't move, didn't invite him. Rick sat anyway, a slow, uncertain drop onto cold concrete. He didn't speak for a while. Then he said, "I knew him." Nathan didn't turn. "Eli?" Rick nodded once. "He came into a bar I owned. Not this one, years ago. Looked like hell. Jacket ripped, eyes hollow. Asked for water. Said he just got back. I told him we didn't serve charity." Nathan turned slowly. Just a glance. Rick swallowed hard. He left, quiet. Never made a scene. 3 days later, I read the notice. His voice cracked. "That's the last face I saw before I closed that place down." A pause. Ocean wind between them. "I didn't know who he was until your buddy showed me that photo." Nathan didn't say anything, but Rick did. "I threw you out last night because when you looked at me, I felt like I was back in that bar, watching Eli leave again, and I couldn't." He trailed off. Nathan's voice was low, steady. "You don't owe me an apology." Rick blinked. "But I do owe him one." Nathan stood up, looked down at the man who'd once turned Eli away and did the same to him, and said, "Then do something he would have stayed to see," and walked away. That afternoon, the bar closed early. No sign, no explanation. Just shutters pulled halfway and lights left off. Rick moved like a man possessed but quiet. No slamming, no muttering, just purpose. He cleared table 6 first, removed the laminated menus, wiped the wood clean with more care than he'd shown in years. Then he brought out a drill, a stained 2x6 plaque, and a marker. It took him less than 20 minutes. When he was done, the plaque sat affixed to the wall above the booth, handwritten in uneven black strokes, reserved for those who came back quiet. Table 6. He placed a single full pint of beer on the table. No coaster. No explanation. And next to it, under a simple frame, he laid the photo David had shown him. 5 men in sand-covered uniforms, smiles worn but full. Eli's was in the center. Nathan, far left. Rick looked at it for a long time. Then, without ceremony, he unlocked the door. Nathan didn't plan to return, not because of pride, not even resentment. He'd just seen too many apologies offered from people desperate to clean their own conscience. Too few offered for the sake of the dead. But when David nudged him hours later and said, "You might want to see this," he followed. The door creaked as they entered. The music was low, and there was no crowd, just a stillness different from the night before. One that felt earned. Nathan saw the table first, stopped, read the plaque, saw the glass, saw Eli's smile, forever frozen in that one wild afternoon before the last mission. He didn't speak. David did. "He's trying, Nate." Nathan's jaw tightened. He nodded once, then slowly, without being asked, he walked over and sat one table away. Not at table 6. Not yet. But close enough. Rick watched from behind the bar. Didn't approach. Didn't speak. Instead, he pulled something from beneath the counter. A folded American flag, stiff from storage. He placed it gently on a high shelf where everyone could see it. No announcement. Just a gesture. That night, 4 men sat quietly in that bar. Nathan, David, 2 others from table 6, drawn in not by summons, but by silence. No one toasted. No one talked about war. But when the bartender passed by, he stopped, looked Nathan in the eye, and with a voice stripped of ego, of bravado, he said, "He came to my bar once. I turned him away. You brought him back." Nathan didn't answer, didn't have to. He just looked down at the pint of beer, then at the plaque, and then he did something no one had seen him do in years. He smiled. Not wide, not warm, but real. And for a brief moment, Eli wasn't a photo. He was right there with them, back at table 6, still loud, still laughing, still home. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows like the past trying to find its way in. But it couldn't. Not tonight. Tonight, they had each other. And a table that would always stay open. Some men return quietly. Some stories do too. And if you've ever carried something no one else could see, this table is yours. The bar closed late that night. Rick stayed behind after the last customer left, wiping down glasses that didn't need cleaning. His hands moved, but his mind wasn't in the room. It was in another bar, another town, another night years ago. He could still see the man's face, thin, dirty. Uniform jacket too big for his frame, boots worn down to the sole, literally and otherwise. He'd wandered in quiet, asked if he could sit, said he just needed water and a little space. Rick had been younger then, meaner, hardened in all the wrong places. He didn't even look the man in the eyes when he said, "You look like trouble." "Not tonight, pal." The guy had left without a word, didn't push back, didn't plead, just nodded and walked into the dark. 3 days later, Rick saw the notice in the paper. Veteran found dead in truck, suspected suicide, no foul play. He didn't recognize the name then. Not until David showed him that photo yesterday, Eli Mercer. Rick felt the name settle into his gut like cold iron. He dropped the glass in the sink and walked to the back storage room. Pulled a dented tin box from the top shelf. Inside were old keepsakes, coasters from the bar that closed down, matchbooks, a business card with his name in gold, back when he still believed in branding more than belonging. And tucked in the corner, a printed security cam still from that night. He'd kept it. Maybe because something deep down already knew. The photo showed the man standing just inside the door, 1 foot over the threshold, the other still unsure. It was Eli. Same eyes, same sadness, same silence. Rick sat heavily on the crate in the corner. The photo shook in his hand, and then it hit him. He hadn't just turned away a man, he'd turned away a moment, a chance, a life. The next day, Nathan returned. Not for beer, not for conversation. He sat at the same booth as the night before, the one near, but not at, table 6. Quiet. Rick walked over slowly, something clenched in his hand. When he got to Nathan's table, he didn't speak right away. Just set down the still frame, the security cam photo. Nathan looked at it, then at Rick. Rick's voice cracked. "I didn't know it was him. Not then. Not when I turned him away." A beat. Then, "He died 3 days later." Nathan's expression didn't change, but his hands curled slightly into fists. Rick sat across from him, eyes hollow. "I threw him out because he looked broken, like he might fall apart in front of everyone. And I couldn't handle that." Another beat. "No one else was in the bar. I could have said yes. I could have just let him sit." Nathan's voice, when it came, was almost too quiet to hear. "But you didn't." Rick nodded. "And I've been carrying that ever since, pretending it wasn't real." Nathan leaned forward slightly. "What made you stop pretending?" Rick gestured around them. "You, the glass, the look on your face, and then that photo." He swallowed. "And maybe I finally got tired of hiding from ghosts." Nathan stared at him for a long, long moment. Then he picked up the photo, and quietly, without a word, he reached across the table and placed it under the plaque at table 6, right beside the frame of the team photo. Now there were 2. One of brotherhood, one of the moment it could have been saved. The room was quiet, And for the first time, so was Rick. The next Friday, someone posted a photo. It was taken from just inside the driftwood dock, angle wide enough to see the whole back wall. The light was soft, early evening, no crowd. But there, front and center, was table 6. The 2 photos under the plaque, one full of life, one quiet and haunting, and the beer, still untouched, still waiting. The caption read, "Some seats stay empty so we remember who never should have been." It went viral in under 24 hours. Veterans from all over the country began tagging it. Some shared their own stories. Others just commented a single word: seen. One person messaged the bar account asking, "Is the seat real? Could I come sit near it?" Rick replied himself, "You can sit near it. You can even talk to it. But the seat itself? That's Eli's. And every quiet man who ever walked in and got turned away." Nathan came in one night later than usual. David was already there, seated quietly near the far end. No conversation, just presence. That was the thing about men like them. Stillness wasn't absence. It was bond. Rick nodded as Nathan walked in. There were no more awkward glances, no tension. Only the feeling of something having finally settled. Not fixed, not forgiven, but seen, named. Rick poured a glass of water and brought it over without being asked. Nathan nodded, the smallest thanks. Then he pulled something from his coat pocket. A coin. Not shiny, not ceremonial, just worn, edges smooth from years of worry and memory. He placed it gently on the edge of table 6. Not as decoration, not for display. Just a message. Quiet. For Eli. Weeks passed. The bar remained the same in most ways. Still smelled of wood and sea salt. Still played Springsteen on Tuesdays. Still poured cheap beer and better whiskey. But something was different. Something had shifted. Locals began referring to the back booth not just as Table 6, but as the one for them. The ones who don't talk. The ones who look like they're seeing 2 worlds at once. One night, a young guy walked in, barely 25, eyes raw from something no one else could name. He hovered near the door. Rick nodded him in, pointed to the stool by the jukebox. No pressure, no push, just space. And slowly, the kid walked in. Sat, stayed. And the silence? It stayed soft. Because this time, someone had made room for it. There's a kind of healing that doesn't shout. It doesn't cry or apologize out loud. It just shows up one night at a time. Sometimes in the form of a man returning to a booth he almost died without. Sometimes in the form of another man finally facing the memory he buried too deep. And sometimes in the form of a beer poured for someone who never got to finish the first one. But always in the form of not looking away. Table 6 isn't famous. It doesn't need to be. It's enough that it's there, still open, still waiting, still telling the story of someone who mattered. And if you've ever carried something too heavy to speak, if you've ever walked into a room hoping someone would see you without needing you to explain, then that table's for you too. Thank you for staying with this story. If it sat with you, even for a moment, leave a comment. Tell us who you remember. Tell us what silence you carry. And if you believe stories like this need to live on, subscribe. We'll keep the seat open, always.